Chapter 19. Angelique's Happy Place. Angelique had been so lost in her thoughts that she had passed through the 4 Humvee checkpoints and halfway across the state without even noticing. She was only an hour away from her parents' house. At this point, they are most likely sitting out front waiting to greet me, pulling down the drive, Angelique told herself. She had already made up her mind that nothing was going to disturb her vacation at home with the parents. The familiar crunch of gravel under her tires quickened Angelique's heartbeat. She was mere moments away from reuniting with her parents. Each pebble and bend in the road carried a memory, from childhood bus rides to school to cherished summer afternoons. But as she drove, her trained eye couldn't help but notice recent tire marks. It was odd, considering her family was supposedly the last residing on 4 Mile Hill. She shook her head, thinking, our phone chats usually revolve around my life, and the ever-present question, have you found a boyfriend yet? Angelique often felt cornered by this topic. Most men she met were either intimidated by her or were her superiors. And then there were the Jonathans of the world. She mused about how lovely it would be to reassign him to a post in Alaska. With a resigned sigh, Angelique braced herself for the inevitable relationship discussions bound to arise during her visit. As she was cresting the hill, her parents were sitting in the swing, smiling and waving, just as she pictured they would. But they weren't there long. Before Angelique knew it, her mother was opening her car door. While she was sliding the car in park, her mother reached out to give her a hug. With that hug, Angelique felt like her vacation had finally begun. The Carringer home radiated a familiar warmth that Angelique had missed ever since her decision to join the army had created a rift between her and her parents. Nestling under the same blankets, in the same bed in her childhood room, she was enveloped by a profound sense of comfort. For the first time in what felt like forever, sleep came to her effortlessly. I thought you military types awaken early to seize the day, her father said, waking her from a peaceful, deep sleep. I'm not in the army anymore. Yes, I still do, she replied, while wondering just what time it was. She didn't have to wonder for long. With a slight sarcasm in his voice, her father said, 8 in the morning is late in my book. But then again, that is farm time, not military. As he turned to leave the room, he let out a little laugh when he saw her jump up from her bed. Angelique couldn't believe it was that late. Mostly she couldn't believe that she had slept through the night without once waking to check the time. She now remembered what it felt like to be fully rested, and with the smell of coffee in the air, she looked around for her running shoes. Fully dressed and ready for her morning run, but still drowsy from her deep sleep, Angelique opened her bedroom door. On this morning, she didn't make it past the kitchen. By the time Angelique realized what was happening, her mother had put a large cup in her hand, and she was drinking. The run Angelique was about to go on never crossed her mind again. After breakfast was over, the 3 of them sat chatting and drinking coffee. Her parents caught Angelique up on what she had missed on the farm, and Angelique tried her best to seem interested. She felt it would be the same if she told them stories about her life, only they would most likely tune her out altogether. Her parents believed that what she did for work was sit behind a desk and nothing more. During the conversation, Angelique remembered her drive down the gravel and the fresh tracks. Did you finally get some neighbors out here? I saw a lot of tracks on my way in. She was curious and hoped that if her parents had new neighbors, they were good neighbors, people her parents would get along with. Oh no, dear. We assumed you knew them since they drove by a few hours after you called to say you were on your way, her mother replied, with confusion in her voice. Angelique was equally puzzled by such a response, and was even more curious now. Why would I know them? Because they were in military vehicles. We don't all know each other, Mum. At that point, Angelique had to learn more, but she didn't want her mother to feel like she was interrogating her. Can you describe them for me? How many? Her mother thought for just a second and then began. Your father and I watched as they passed by, so yes. The first one was a truck, really big and tall. It looked loaded with a lot of stuff. Behind that were 2 white buses full of men. At that point, Angelique's heart started pumping at double its speed. She couldn't believe what she had just stumbled onto. Her mother had just described the rogue company, but then her mother went on. Then behind that was one of those Jeep-like things with 4 doors, and then... Hold it. There were others, Angelique asked her mother as the excitement she was feeling drained from her. She figured it must have been a unit out looking or training in the area. It wasn't unheard of for the military to rent land for training. Yes, there were... That's okay, Mum, I'll ride down later and check it out. Where did Dad get off to? Angelique asked, no longer excited about the prospect of finding the rogue company. She felt that the idea of their being in Rocktown was a little unbelievable, since they had been last seen heading south for Arkansas. As Angelique pitched in with the morning chores, she couldn't help but notice the subtle changes in her father's pace. Gone was the swift efficiency of his younger days, replaced by a deliberate, measured rhythm. It was a poignant reminder of the relentless march of time. Her heart ached slightly at the realization, wishing she could have been there more for her aging parents. Yet she also understood her father's pride and fierce independence, traits she had undoubtedly inherited. Feeling a bit nostalgic, Angelique decided to revisit a cherished part of her past, the training grounds in the woods where she had spent countless hours. The memories came surging back as she tied her bootlaces. While the majority of those recollections brought a smile to her face, there was one that was tinged with gloominess, the day Karnik broke the news that he was moving away. Venturing into the fields, Angelique felt a familiar, tingling sensation prickling at the nape of her neck. Her senses heightened, almost as if she were being watched. The sense of being on high alert, which she often felt during her operations or when investigating, gripped her, and she couldn't shake it off. She chided herself for letting her professional instincts take over in such a familiar and cherished place. But as the outline of her childhood training ground materialized, the unease began to dissipate. Time had eroded most of its structures, but the core elements of her childhood challenges still shone faintly in the disarray. The log, once a tool for honing her balance, now lay covered in moss and the earthy scars of time. The mounds, which once stood tall, had now been flattened and carried away by the winds and rains of countless seasons. Gazing at the disturbed weeds, Angelique surmised that some local wildlife had been wandering around the area. But something about the disturbance didn't sit right. While it looked like typical animal tracks, there was an order to them, a pattern that she couldn't quite decipher. Curiosity getting the better of her, she decided to investigate further. Goosebumps rose instantly as Angelique heard the ever-so-soft rustling of vines and weeds behind her. She instinctively reduced her center of gravity, squatted, and spun in one fluid motion. Striking out with her leg, Angelique's instincts kicked in as she grappled with the figure, quickly recognizing it as another human. Without hesitation, she maneuvered for control. Her movements, honed from years of training, were automatic and swift. She expertly tripped the intruder, sending them sprawling to the ground. As she spun around, she gained some distance, and when she faced her assailant again, the cold gleam of her Colt stood as a barrier between them. "What the hell?" a man's voice cried out as he thumped against the ground. "Don't move an inch," Angelique commanded, in a stance ready to strike once more. "Where in the world did you pull that from?" Angelique felt there was something very familiar about the man she had just put on the ground, but she couldn't place it. That would have to wait. She could tell instantly that he was a soldier, and a sergeant first class at that. "Never mind that. What are you doing here?" she again commanded. Angelique knew that he had to be with the guys her mom had seen pass yesterday, and the very same group she planned on visiting later. What she didn't understand was why he was in this spot at this time. "Damn, you think you could let me win for once?" the soldier asked. A flood of memories came rushing back to her, memories of sparring with Carl. Then it hit her like a pile of bricks. Squinting as if staring at something unbelievable, Angelique saw the name tag on his uniform. Karnik, Carl Karnik. Angelique began lowering her Colt slowly in disbelief. It was unbelievable to her and hard to wrap her thoughts around. Angelique was frozen, standing there and just staring at him. She knew that he was saying something. She just couldn't make it out. She visualized shaking her head to clear the thoughts racing around inside. "Angelique," he repeated, trying to get her attention, "you going to let me up?" She stood up straight and reached out her hand. "Only if you don't make me put you back down," she replied, as they gave each other a huge hug. Right off, she noticed that he was no longer the lanky boy she had once been in love with. The next hour was spent sitting on the rotten makeshift balance beam, talking about the past, where Carl had gone to live, and how his Opa had given him service tags belonging to his biological grandfather, and how his Opa had been serving in the US Army in Germany after the war. before bringing him and his mother to the United States. Carl told Angelique things that he never spoke of, like how he felt the day they moved away, deployments he had been on, and many other experiences he'd had, with the exception of the last few days. In return, she told him all about her life from the time they departed until that moment. Karnik was startled to hear that Angelique headed up the DHS office in Dallas. He was glad that he hadn't told her what had transpired recently. Angelique seemed to be satisfied with her own assumption that they were in the area for training, nothing more. Angelique could tell that her feelings from all those years ago were coming back. She thought it had to be due to how abruptly their relationship had ended. She remembered the day even more vividly when Karnik stood up, looked at his watch and said, "I have to be getting back. We have a big day tomorrow and much planning to iron out. You remember what it's like?" "Oh, I sure do. My days ran like that up until that gunfight at Squire's Ranch." She shrugged it off. "Had things not gone the same, I may not have ever seen you again, so at least one good thing came from it." Angelique was beginning to feel like a schoolgirl again, and she liked it. "What is your phone number? I'll call or text you later." Karnik almost panicked, but then replied, "I made everyone leave them at the armory. Didn't want distractions while in the field. Let me take yours down, and I will most definitely call sometime soon." After he took down her number, they hugged goodbye, and then she watched as he disappeared into the woods.